Hi, I'm Yasmine Shahbazi. I'm here today with Michael Rideau, and we are in the Texana room in Fondren Library. It is April 11th, 2018. Okay, let's started. So, do you want to start with just telling me about when and where you were born?
Port Arthur, Texas. It's about 330 miles southeast of Dallas.
Okay, cool. And do you want to tell me a little bit more about your family and growing up there? How long were you there for?
I was born and raised in Port Arthur. Attended, obviously elementary, high school, and what have you. And it's a lunch bucket town, small, pretty quaint. The area in and around Port Arthur is called the Golden Triangle, really. Beaumont, Port Arthur, Orange, Texas. And mainly a refinery would be one industry. Work at a refinery, still today, probably the largest refinery, probably in the world, probably Texas anyway. Outside of that, the opportunities that were offered, you could be a merchant marine on a ship or work at a grain elevator. Besides the other jobs we're teaching and what have you, but for a young kid, 17, 18, that's coming out of high school, you couldn't go back after finishing college and expect to go to a teaching job because those teachers stayed there forever until they died. So I knew that I wasn't going to go back to Port Arthur when I made the decision to come to SMU.
Okay, and so do you want to tell me a little bit more about that? So what, were you thinking of any other schools or what?
Sure.
drew you to SMU?
Well, Rice was one. Indiana, IU was another school. USC, looked at that. They just, they partied a little bit too much for me on the West Coast. And Houston, while it was very good, offered a great opportunity, having that water there just reminded me that if I finished, that I could probably always go back into a job concerning water or merchant marining. Okay. And I certainly didn't want that. And coming to Dallas, I visited Dallas about 3 times and knew that I didn't know what the opportunity would be. I just knew that it didn't have water, it didn't have a grain elevator, and it didn't have a refinery. And so I would not be working any of those jobs. And that was a motivating factor in looking at the schools. The other greatest motivating factor, I was an athlete, and the opportunity to run with some of the teammates. I'd met a couple of guys my sophomore year in high school that were attending school here, Gene and Joe Pouncey. And they went to a school called Lincoln here, and I went to a school called Lincoln in Port Arthur. And we competed against one another in high school, and so it was an opportunity to join them in coming to school here. Of course, though, the academics were primary, and I almost went to school, almost chose Indiana. Just unfortunately, it was too cold. And so the decision was easy for me, at least in choosing Dallas.
Okay. So describe your first year here. How did it go? What was the atmosphere like at that time?
It was, when you're recruited to come to a school, you don't see it like you see it when you first come to school as a student. And so it was a little culture shock altogether. I'd come from a predominantly black high school. But I was always able to get along, being an athlete. You compete with everybody, so you're able to get along with anyone. At least I am able to. The one factor amongst the student population that was a surprise is that when you speak to somebody, they didn't speak back. And that was a bit of a culture shock, because coming out of a town small, Port Arthur's only about 60,000 people. But everybody spoke to everybody. And so I wasn't accustomed that when I speak to somebody, they didn't speak back. So that was a bit of a kind of a shock. Outside of that, it was a fast pace in terms of class. That was okay. I just had to pick up my game, in terms of studying, and so that was okay. But outside of that, it was I kept busy. We didn't have money certainly to come to SMU, and so my agenda was, besides class, I knew I had to find a job.
Right.
Although I was working. Working and being a student as an athlete, they only paid you $10 a month, and $10 didn't go very far. At all. And my folks didn't have money to send me $100 a week or anything like that. So it was a job, work, and at that time, I knew that I had to at least take a minimum of 18 hours. I'd figured it out in terms of looking at the hours to graduate. And so I knew not going back to Port Arthur and having those three obstacles of not working at a refinery, not want to be on a boat or ship or grain elevator, that I had to get as many hours as I possibly could. And I was not ever going to take a basket weaving class, simply because I figured out that nobody's, when you look at your transcript, is going to want to hire somebody that's just taking basket weaving classes.
And so what did you study here?
I had a double major. I had finance and marketing as a major. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I didn't know. My folks were laborers. They weren't any bankers or business or anything like that, and so I didn't know any professional jobs. Period. I just knew what I didn't want to do. And I had heard my uncle talk about accounting, so I just latched on to that thinking, oh, okay, that's easy enough. I could be an accountant. And so I enrolled. I had a class, and it seemed to be Greek to me, at the time. And I think our class was I think it started with 33 students, and it ended up with 19. But I didn't like it. And by an accident, I think I ran into a professor by the name of Don Jackson. And he was an unusual man. And he told me about finance. I didn't know, I just knew how to spell finance. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what it did. And he just said, well, just try it, And so the first time I stepped into the class, it was huge. It was bigger than this room. And I had not been accustomed to being in a huge class. And I thought immediately I wasn't going to like it, but I fell in love with it. And, but Don Jackson, or Dr. Jackson, made the class interesting. And not only made it interesting, but he had an interest in the student. And particularly had an interest in me, and took an interest in me. And I to this day, I look at him as a father. Quite honestly. And I say that because after class, so if I didn't understand something, whether it was in that class or any other class, I could go and talk to him about it. I could go to his office, and his door was always open. You don't get a chance at a professor like that. You get a chance doing junior high school and high school, perhaps, but I didn't have it at the collegiate level. Mm-hmm. My English professor wasn't anything like that, science or anybody else. And it was something unusual about him that stood out. And he had a passion for not only what he taught, but he had a passion for people. And for somebody of color, there were only 9 black athletes that came to SMU in 1972. And so it wasn't like it was a bunch of us. And so that stood out. But I was destined to think that I knew I was going to have to make it, whether I had to stay in the library all the time. I don't think that some of my professors didn't even know I was an athlete, because they would periodically come through Fondren, and this is where I spent most of my time, was in the library. And so, one thing led to another, and I ended up with, I think, 36 hours of finance and 24 hours of marketing. And during the interims of taking those classes, I was also able to take interns. I did 2 interns in banking, 1 in insurance. But it all stood back with Dr. Jackson latching on to a professor to help me understand and navigate what I wanted to do. Because without him, I wouldn't have known what to do. I knew that I knew the classes that I wasn't and did not want to take, but I didn't have any idea about what curriculum I needed to take to get into anything like banking. And when he suggested banking, I had no idea of being a lender, a commercial lender. I mean, I didn't even know exactly how that came about or what. And so when he told me about it, and at that time, I had, during that era, we wore afros, bell bottoms and what have you. And so I had a pretty big afro at the time. And my kids kind of used to kid me, and they'd laugh at me, and they said, "You mean you had hair like this, or you wore pants like this?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that was just during that time and era." And so Dr. Jackson said, "Okay, Michael, I want you to go down, and at that time there were 3 large banks, First National Bank, Republic Bank, and Mercantile." And he said, "I just want you to go, and I want you to go in each one of those banks and just look around. And I want you to come back and talk to me and tell me what you see." I thought, well, that's easy enough. And I came back and I told him I didn't see anybody that looked like me. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, they all look like you." I said, "The only time I saw somebody black was a lady. They were tellers." I said, "But I didn't see anybody that looked like me." He says, "Okay." He says, "Well, we're going to change it." I said, "Oh, okay." Well, I was like, "Well, how are we going to do that?" And so his first question was, "Okay, well, how did you," he said, "Well, what did you tell me? And tell me exactly what you saw again." So I described it again. He said, "Okay." He said, "Well, can you cut your hair?" I thought, I'm not going to cut my hair like you. I said, "My hair has nothing to do with the way I think." He said, "Okay, well, that's all right." Well, by the time he asked me the 3rd time, it just hit me in the head like a stack of bricks. I said, "Sure, I can cut my hair." He said, "We're just trying to fit in to get in." And I thought, yeah, okay. And so that was an easy deal. He said, "Now, what about the clothes and wearing?" And I had some kind of a jazzed up suit or whatever. And so he says, "Well, we're going to need to change the style and whatever." I said, "Yeah, that's fine." But so to make a long story short, that was how I got into banking. Yes, and I credit that all to him.
Yeah, that's nice that you had such a mentor during this time. But going off of that and like professors and stuff, like aside from Dr. Jackson, did you have any other relationships with any other professors, or like what was the atmosphere like? Like, were there any professors that were not as kind to you, or just not as accepting at that time, or did you just feel like you?
No, I wouldn't say that they were not accepting. I mean, they were okay. They didn't come across as arrogant or you shouldn't be here. They were just professors and kind of a no-nonsense. And, Bronze was an English professor, and he took the attitude that we will not have any handwritten papers. At the time, I thought, well, that's the only thing I knew how to do, handwrite a paper. He said, well, we won't accept any. We will just have to have typed papers. And I thought, oh man, this is going to be doomed. I'm going to fail this class. And it was so funny because he said, it's funny. He said, he looked around the class. He says, it has not been one athlete to pass my class. And so I think there were like 5 of us in there. And he said, this is the opportunity. This is the time, guys. He didn't say girls, he said guys. That if you want to go ahead and, go to another class or take another class, this is the time to do it. He says, because I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to just pass you because you're an athlete. He said, so this is the time, and he said to get out. And so he looked around, and he didn't look at me, and all of them asked me, I said, why did he look at you? I said, I don't know. I said, I think he just sees me in the library every time I see him through there, so he don't think I'm an athlete. And but anyway, make a long story short, I passed this class, and just went on. But in those, at least at that time, we had religion, science, and they just taught. I mean, when class was over, it was over. They went to the next class, whatever they needed to teach or what have you. But Dr. Jackson was a type of guy. He was just kind of unusual in that he was kind of inviting. And he would make it relative to the things that were going on. And when he would even present the book, just like ministers do a Bible in Pentecostal churches, he would make it relevant to the time, as opposed to having just the theory in the book. And I thought, oh, that was a wake-up call for me, because you don't find teachers that teach in real time. I mean, they teach the theology that's coming in the book, but they're not going to parallel that to examples of everyday life that you have to go through. And he took it to the extent to where if somebody borrowed money, and if they didn't pay it back, or if they paid it back, and he gave illustrations. And that just kind of stuck with me. And so it reminded me of growing up. I say we didn't have much money, but we used to have a little insurance man that would come to our house and knock on our door every Friday and collect money, for the insurance or whatever change from mother. She'd always give him a cup of coffee. And it was something in the class that talked about paid up insurance. And so Dr. Jackson told me, he said, well, just take insurance, because I just kind of found out about it. So after I would take the class and things that I didn't understand, I'd go back and talk to him. And so when I figured it out, I said, whoa, gosh. I said, I'm going to call my mother. I said, I think this insurance has been paid up for some time. I said, but I don't know. I said, I'm just going to make that phone call. So I just dashed to his class, and he let me make the phone call from his class. Because at that time, there were no cell phones, so it was a long distance call, so I didn't have money to just go to the room and just do that, So I did that, and I said, Mother, I think I figured something out. I said, look, she said, what? I said, well, I think Mr. Tennessee has had his last cup of coffee. She said, what do you mean? I said, that insurance that we have, that you've been paying on. I said, just ask him if it's a paid up policy, and ask the second question. He says, yeah. I said, just ask him, well, as long as I've been paying on it, isn't it paid up? And it had been. Yeah. So we knew then, at least my mother and I, there were 11 of us in the family, but I was the first to go to college. I had two older brothers than I, but they didn't go to college. And as I said, I was either destined to either go to the service because we didn't have the money, or I knew if I did okay in my athletics, I would get a scholarship. And so that's why I ended up being the first going to college. And so we knew then, we said, well, education is our only way out. We knew that was it. And as I said, I was destined to not go back to do those 3 jobs. And that was the very big motivating factor for me. And so I just was ingrained in taking these finance classes. The counselors would put down like a nature man or some other class, and I would strike it out. And I would just put this business class. And I mean, it was just something that I knew that I couldn't go and get a job with nature man. I mean, it just didn't register. It was like, they don't get it. I just don't want to pass. I really want to compete. And the other principal fact was, I don't know anybody here. So it was important for me, for these people that had contacts or whatever, it was important for me to get ahead of them. So I tried to take it sometimes 18 hours or 24 hours sometimes, hours. Because I wanted to finish up my senior year of only having maybe 3 or 6 hours to graduate, so I could spend time beating the turf of going out looking for a job. And not understanding or realizing that Dr. Jackson had it in his brain for me to go to these banks, because I wasn't going to interview with the banks. I mean, I did that so I would have it on my resume so they would understand that I'm at business. And I only needed 6 hours to graduate come my senior year. And I started out, there was a company called Burroughs Corporation that was here. And they probably offered me the most money that I had in 76. They said that they would pay me $30,000. Well, the bank was only going to pay me $10,500. And so, but Dr. Jackson and I had a bet. I'm going to back up just a little bit. He said, Michael, he said, whatever you choose to do, it's going to be all right with me, he said. And I know he said, I know you're going to talk to your mother about it. I said, yeah, you're right. So after we talked about these banks that I had gone to see, and I knew I had already worked 2 summers with InterFirst Bank, so I knew the people. And so I just thought, this is going to be simple. I said, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to go to work with InterFirst, and I'll just get this out of the way. But the bet was, I could not take a job with a bank that was going to relegate me to marketing or something else other than credit. And I thought, oh gosh. He said, that's the bet. He said, so you could say thank you, but no thank you, but you cannot let them put you somewhere for 6 months or a year and then come back into credit. You will take the job of one of those banks that's going to offer credit. So I just thought I'd go to InterFirst since I knew the people, and they said, oh, Michael, you're a week late, but you know David Zant, you've worked with him before in marketing. Why don't you work with him for 6 months, and then we're going to put you in credit. And of course, he was in my ear about, and I thought, well, okay, thank you. And so the second interview I had was with Republic Bank, and they offered me the job in credit right on the spot. And I thought, God Almighty. I said, he's won this bet. I thought, geez, I got to go back and tell him, So before I made the phone call to my mother, and I told her, about this, and I said, but kind of what do you think? She says, I'll tell you what I think, but I know what you're thinking. I said, oh. She says, oh, you want to take that job that's offering you the most money? I said, yeah. I said, Mother, we've been poor, we've been broke. I said, I don't want to have to do this for the rest of my life. I said, this is a chance. She says, I understand everything you're saying. She says, why don't you think about it this way? Take a job where you're going to look at helping someone out. You said that you wanted to do something where you were going to make a difference, but you wanted to understand why we didn't have something and somebody else did. And so she says, I think you're going to get more out of it if you take that job, banking job. And she didn't know Dr. Jackson from a Man on the Moon. And I thought, God Almighty, so I thought, Jesus Christ. And I've always said, everything that I am or ever shall be, I owe to my mother. So I just knew at that point that I wasn't going to disappoint her. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and crawl back, and I'll tell him that they've offered me this job, and this job I'm going to take it. And so that's what I did. And so all of my buddies and friends had gone into corporate America, and every one of them had a salary much bigger than mine. And then they started dogging me. They started, saying, oh, we thought you were smart. I said, man, you turned out to be the dumb guy by taking the lowest paying job. They said, man, they said, come on now. I said, that would have been the last job I would have taken. I said, well, guys, y'all don't understand the motivation. I said, I kind of look at it that they're going to pay me to learn. I said, but more so, I told you that I wanted to understand why certain people had something and other people didn't. And the years caught up very quickly. I mean, the third year, our salaries were about the same. And then all of a sudden, mine started escalating. And I felt like a kid in a candy shop because I got a chance to make a difference. And I got a chance to make a difference with people that are moving Dallas because it's private. I mean, I didn't go into a national market to call on the Exxons of the world. I wanted to. I thought that's what I wanted to do. But I ended up calling on private businesses and small businesses, and got a chance to make a difference in their life, which, as it turned out, made a difference in mine.
Right. That's awesome. So, where did you live when you were in undergraduate school? Were you ever in the dorms, or did you live?
Yeah, I was in the dorm. Okay. Dorm first year I lived in Bose.
Oh,
Bose
really?
had union baths, and I'll never forget my RA, Frank Roby. Really a super guy, really a nice guy. And my second year I lived in Peyton 1 year. I played football for a year and a half.
Okay.
Before I quit, and then I lived off campus in an apartment. And
Who'd you live with?
By myself.
Oh, by yourself. Okay.
Yeah, I lived in an apartment by myself, and I had a place on campus. Well, I had a roommate, but if I didn't have an early class, I just stayed in the apartment.
Okay. Who was your roommate when you lived in Bose?
Yeah, Ira Terrell. Yeah, he played basketball.
Ira Terrell?
Yes.
I've heard about him.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
So that was the beginning of it, and it's so funny because in playing football at SMU, I was kind of like a walk-on almost, but it was under scholarship, and they fired Hayden Fry was the coach at the time, and they fired Coach Fry my freshman year. And so in the second year, Coach Dave Smith, they had hired Dave Smith. It's so funny because Bum Phillips was the defensive coordinator at the time, and most of the guys that started and all praised him and wanted him to be the coach. And I never forget, there was an athletic director named Dick Davis, and he said that Bum Phillips was too country to be an Ivy League coach. And I will never forget that. And Bum Phillips went on to win, because he was coach in Houston and the Saints, and his son's still coaching to this day, Wade Phillips. But my sophomore year, Oscar Rohn and I were roommates at summer camp, and we were doing 3 days that summer. And so this day, Coach Smith said that anybody that had classes after 12 should drop them. And because he wanted the guys to eat lunch, watch film, lift weights, and then hit the field. I didn't start as a sophomore, so nobody raised their hand. I thought, well, I'm not going to embarrass myself. And so I waited till after the meeting was over, and I went up to him, and I just said, well, Coach, were you serious about these classes? I said, because I have a 2 o'clock finance class, and I can't get out there. They're not offering anywhere else. I can't get any other class. And he looked me in the eye and said, Mike, if you're going to be a Mustang, he said, you'll drop that class and just find some other year to take it. I said, yes, sir. So when I went back to the room, I said, well, Big O, I said, I guess I played my last down of ball for the school. I said, I told you why I came here in the first place. And so I said that I'm going to tell you first, and then you're going to hear me call my mother and tell her second. And so that's exactly what I did. And God has a funny way, of how He comes into your life. That same year, I made All-American in track. So it worked out extraordinarily well for me.
That's awesome. I was going to ask, so I knew that, I wasn't familiar that you were on the football team, but I knew that you were on the 400-meter relay team, and that you and the two people that you mentioned previously, the twins.
And there was another guy named Rufus Shaw.
Yeah, you guys won the Southwest Conference 3 years in a row, so that's impressive. So did you start out at SMU both on the football team and the relay team?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and on the track team, actually, we held the Southwest Conference record.
Wow.
Yeah, and the funny part about that, I stay in touch with Gene and Joe both. For some reason or another, SMU has discarded all of its track records, which is kind of strange.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, if you go over there, you won't find them.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because we had to look. When we looked, we found our records in University of Texas books, and not SMU's, and that was a little strange.
Yeah, that's odd.
Yeah.
Because I found this information from SMU, so that's weird. But so, do you think that you were more passionate about track than football? Is that why you decided to continue on track but quit football, or was just football way more time consuming?
No, it's because the coach asked me to drop my class.
Yeah, so you just felt like it was.
Well, my motivation was I had to get that class. I had to take it, and I was going to get. My aspirations was to get an education, Football and track was what got me here.
Right.
But in order for me to make it in the world or society, we always talked about it was education. And I had no aspirations of wanting to play pro football. I had no aspirations of wanting to run pro track. Track didn't pay anything anyway. And so I really wasn't thinking about giving myself up, trying to just do that the rest of my life. And professional football, I just didn't want to play it after I finished college, but it was fun. I mean, I think to some extent, you're lucky when you can be an athlete, I think, in terms of whether you can play ball or run track. But at the end of the day, it was an education that I was after. And when he told me that I had to drop it, it was like cutting off my arm or cutting my leg off. I just couldn't believe that that was his alternative. But if that's, when I always respected an adult and respects other people's decision.
Right.
And if that was going to be their decision, then I had to. My mother always told me, when somebody shows you who they are, you better believe them. Don't second guess it. Just trust what they say, and then you get yourself in gear and do what you need to do. So that's why I stayed with track. And
so tell me a little bit more about that. Did you do track in high school too? Is that why you wanted to do that? So you said you were recruited for both. So what were your teammates like?
Oh, they were great. The four of us, and Sammy Walker was another one. He threw the shot put and discus. But those guys were great. They were great to travel with, great on the road. Never a problem, not a problem whatsoever. As I said, we even still communicate today. And so that tells you a lot, I think, about, and that was from my freshman year all the way through my senior year.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your coach like?
Coach Barr was nice. He was extraordinarily nice. He was an incredible human being. He had a lot of compassion. Track didn't have a lot of money, and that was the one thing that I uncovered in running here. In order for us to go to certain meets, he had to ask the athletic department for money. And it was odd how they treated him. And he would tell us about it. And I thought, oh, wow. I never looked at it from a financial standpoint in terms of what brings money into a university and how that has to be spread through the other departments. But there were some alumni that really loved track and had given money to the school just to support the track program. And they were tight about releasing that to him. And he would tell us about that, but he didn't have to. But Coach Parr was unique in that he just said, guys, my hands are tied. But he just, he would say, look, I know this is $10 a month or whatever, but his wife was going to cook. He said, you guys, why don't y'all just come to my house? I'll just invite you. So you don't have coaches that would just do that. But he was always interested, not just in the results of what you're running, but also about the classes. He would ask about, how you doing in this class or that class, or do you need help? I told you early on that I had an English professor that said he wasn't going to take any handwritten, athletes, but he wasn't going to take any handwritten, and I didn't know what to do because I didn't know how to type.
Yeah.
I didn't take any typing classes. But he found a teacher that knew how to type and agreed to help me. And so every time I had a paper, I would walk to her house and I'd write my paper out. I mean, she didn't do the work for me. I did my own work. But I would go to her house and she would type my paper and I would turn it in. But then he was a no-nonsense professor. It was one young lady, she's white, had very neat writing, and I never forget, he said, I told the class I wasn't going to take any handwritten paper, says, "This is a very neat paper," and he tore it up right there in front of the class. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's definitely no nonsense.
Yeah. So.
So other than, I know you clearly were very busy as a student with two, like dual athlete and in the business school, was there anything else that you were involved in on campus?
I pledged Alpha.
Okay.
We were a charter or a line, and many a times we'd run track, and I'd come back, I'd be dead tired, and they'd want you to do something, but in addition to that, I worked. So I mean, I had. I didn't have time to do the things I think that are normal. Well, I did have the time, but I didn't go partying. I mean, that wasn't just, it just wasn't in my game plan. My deal was to get as much as I could. When I figured I only had these 4 years of my life, that was going to determine the rest of my life. I mean, back then. And so it was either get these classes now, or I would pay for it dearly later. And I'd much prefer doing what I could within those 4 years.
Did you ever feel that pressure within Greek life that you needed to party and
Oh, sure.
drink? And
Well, never the drink. We were raised where alcohol just wasn't a part of growing up.
Okay.
And, although that was going on, I couldn't compete if I did that. I mean, I just couldn't function. I mean, I almost had to watch what I would eat on Mondays, because if you just ate too much for lunch, it'll come back up for when you're practicing. I mean, that was just so. That just wasn't in the cards of having to follow that life. If I was going to, and as I said, we didn't have any money, and so I certainly couldn't afford to flunk, because we certainly couldn't have paid for me to go anywhere else. And at that time, SMU was $7,500 a year, if you can believe that.
Oh
and we didn't, and we didn't have it then. So partying and drinking just wasn't a normal part of the curriculum for me.
okay. And then would you say that all of your friends were probably on the same page as you in terms?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, for the most part.
Were you mainly friends with your teammates, or did you have friends outside of?
We had other friends. I had other friends outside of that. I mean, we met, obviously your people that you meet on the football team and track team, but we had other folks in the class that we got along with, but you're going to spend most of your times when you're not in class. You're going to spend most of your times with your people that you're running with from an athletic standpoint. And then I didn't have time, even after studying, to think that, I'm just going to go over here and visit this person in a dorm. I had to go to work.
Right.
So I had friends that I had developed through my working, and I worked every year. I was here at school.
Did you have any friends during SMU, like good friends that were white, or?
Some. Not a lot, but had some few. I mean, it was a few. I never had problems get along with people, and then quite honestly, when I did run into somebody that was either arrogant or disrespectful, I would just simply walk away. I just figured it wasn't any use in engaging. It's a waste of my energy. It's like crying or frowning. You're going to use more of your muscles when you cry, you frown. So you may as well make the best of what you have. And that's why I've always looked at it. As I said, I would talk to my mother. She was such a brilliant little lady, and I never knew how smart she was. But I tell people all the time, as a boy growing up, I tell you, there's 11 of us, but as a boy, we couldn't be in bed past 7 o'clock in the morning, and I never thought about that, and I never forget one day I was in bed, and my mother came back and she said, "Something's wrong with you?" I said, "Oh no, I'm just tired. I'm getting up." She said, "Oh, you're tired?" I said, "That's okay." So she said, "Michael," she says, "Miss Gladys down the road needs her dirt turned over, her little weeds pulled and her dirt turned over. And she didn't have anybody to do it, so I told her, you come down and do it." I said, oh, she said, no, I told you to come now. You need to do it before it gets hot. I said, yes, ma'am. I never forget, I put my little shorts and t-shirt on, and right before I hit the door, she says, oh, by the way, don't have your hand out when you're leaving. That just meant that don't you take any money. You're not going to get paid. And so I told my brother, I said, look, we got to go and find a job. I said, you know, she's not playing. And so he and I would rent a mower, the lawnmower is a push mower. Okay. And I would cut and he would edge. He'd had a shovel and he would edge with the shovel. And so it was like $2 a yard. But that started our little work ethic, and that just kind of stayed. And so I started buying my own clothes from the 7th grade on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was nothing like, work was always kind of a simple thing for us. Right. Growing up. I mean, that was just a way of life.
Yeah, you seem to be really disciplined. You mentioned that, you know, just generally, like, whenever people would be like arrogant or rude or just whatever, was there ever like do you have like a distinct memory of anything that happened that was just kind of like stuck with you, where you were just like, wow?
Well, people would say things, but to me it was a wake-up call of when they would say things, and I would just kind of think back, well, to some extent they think it's their world. But my thinking was, if I retaliated against that, while I would win, I would lose big. And while I could win the fight, perhaps, I would lose, because if something ever came up for a job or something, they would remember that conflict over anything else. And that would be a huge detriment. So I've always kept that in my brain. But my body said something else would be totally different. And so, but through running, and thank God for running, I could just let off steam, you know, and so I've carried that from college on even till now.
And you said none of your teammates on the track team, you never had any problems with them?
No, as a matter of fact, I remember, when somebody hit my teammate one time, and he was more disciplined than I. He just looked at him and said, you know, I've given you shoes to wear when you didn't have any on your feet. And he said, and this is what you will do to me. He says, fine. And he just walked away. And so that reminded me of my grandfather. He could show you better than they can tell you. And so conflict's just going to bring conflict if you stay there with it. And so we didn't have that vengeance. Thank God, being on the track team. Now, if it was probably just the football, probably we would have thought a little differently, you know. But
like that on the football team?
Yeah, you would always get into a fight on the field. Yeah. I mean, that's just that's par for the course. Yeah. I mean, anybody thinks that you're going to get out there and you're going to get hit and not hit back. I mean, they're just lying. Right. You're going to get into scuffles, and some of them not going to be fair. Yeah. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, I know you said you clearly dealt with it in a very mature way. Did you have any friends that maybe weren't as tough as you and just like handle it and reacted differently than you?
Well, I don't know if we're calling it tough. No more.
Thick skin too, and just being mature about it. Like, were there some people who were like, this is not okay, and then they said something?
Yeah, well, they did say it wasn't okay, and they did something about it. And so yeah, I saw some of that. Yeah, that went on, and and it's in a strong message. I mean, there was a fight between the football team and fraternity one night, you know, and it wasn't pretty. Thank God they didn't get kicked off the team, but there was no other retaliation, that was going on. But
what was the fight about? Just nothing.
It was a black and white issue, and there were some things that were said that shouldn't have been said, and it just got the best of them. And they said, enough's going to be enough, because we don't get it when we're on the field, and they think they can drink and say these things, and it's not going to happen. So they settled the score a little differently, but that was a way to look and learn, and not to say that was the right thing to do, because I think both sides were wrong. You know, so you just got to choose your battles. I think, you know, no matter what you do in life, you got to choose them, and you just got to be wise. You know, growing up, I didn't understand when my grandfather said, "Turn the other cheek." You know, if you hit me, I was going to hit you back. It was no question in my brain what I was going to do. And then once I started looking at dollars and cents, I thought, you know, that's when I start to think, you know, if you don't, it's gonna cost you.
Yeah. So obviously you've touched on it, how you're a banker, but do you want to go a little bit more into like what specifically or where you work right now? So I'm assuming you don't work at the same place.
No, I started working at Republic Bank, and we, you know, when the 80s came, the downturn came, and I don't know, you know, Republic, InterFirst, and Mercantile were the three largest banks, and Republic and InterFirst Bank were about they floated between 31 and $33 billion, give or there. Mercantile Bank was about a $20 billion bank, and never in the history that we had oil and gas and real estate to go south at one time. You know, either you had oil and gas to go south or you had real estate to go south, but not both. And so we had both to go at the same time. And so most of the bank's assets were divided equally, like a third in oil and gas, third in real estate, third in everything else. So if 2/3 of your portfolio start to go south, I don't care how smart you are, you can't stop that. And so we failed. Well, before we failed, we had bought InterFirst Bank, and it was a flip. InterFirst could have bought Republic, but I don't know how Republic got to buy InterFirst, but it did, and we changed our name from Republic to First Republic. And when First Republic fell, NCNB out of North Carolina came to purchase it. And we went through some issues there. They started picketing the bank, and, you know, they called NCNB with no cash for nobody, no cash for no blacks. I mean, you know, and so the banks in the south part of Texas started being picketed. And so we came up with another name and changed it from NCNB to Nations Bank. And Bank of America had come into Texas through Gibraltar Savings and Loans, and they couldn't make a go of it, but Nations Bank made a play to purchase the bank. And we didn't know they had problems. And they said yes. And so Nations Bank bought Bank of America. And when you think of it in the scheme of things, Republic and InterFirst didn't have a huge presence in the international markets. Had some, not a lot, but your larger banks like a Wells or Bank of America had a very good domestic presence as well as an international presence. And so they changed the name from Nations to Bank of America. And when they did that, we went through a huge downsize. That was in 2000. And about 7,000 of us were downsized. And it was the right thing to do. I mean, anytime you pay for something, you buy something, you got to pay for it some kind of way. And so I'd always worked. And so I understood what they needed to do. And I needed to start gearing my mind on what else I'm going to do in my next life. And it was fortunate through works and contacts that one of my clients were on the board of another community bank. I didn't know anything about community banks. And so I get a call. I had been interviewing these other larger banks to go to and hadn't accepted anything. And so the community bank offered me an opportunity, and I thought, oh, wow, this is just like when I went to work for a Republic Bank when I first got out of college. So I got to do that, and that was I was downsized in May of 2000. I took that job in November of 2000. And the greatest part of that is that I had a severance package when I was downsized. So I was getting paid there, and then I got paid, yes, and so very few opportunities come in your life for anybody like that, let alone than me. And so that happened, and in 2008, American National Bank out of Terrell, Texas, came and purchased us. And American National Bank of Texas has been around since 1875. But the good news of that bank is they weren't invested in oil and gas. And so when they started going through Texas and down, closing these banks, they were able to fare than any of the major banks. And they still are that way. And so the good news for Mike Rideau is they merged my time from the time I worked at Dallas National Bank of May of 2000 to now. From in 2008, they said, Michael, we will merge your time with the bank as though you started with us in 2000. So that ended up being pretty good. Yeah, so it's been, I go back to what my mother said, take that job where you're helping somebody, and I keep pinching myself daily that I get a chance to affect somebody's life. And it's not about money. That's the other good part about it. I mean, a fellow told me a long time ago, I said, if you work and then you do something nice for somebody and you don't expect in return, it'll come back to you. It'll be just like the Bible said, you'll get it back one way or another. And I've gotten it tenfolded. Yeah, so it's been a great reality check and a great, and I attribute that to coming to school. The thought about coming to a predominantly white school, that they don't want you here, they don't want this, and that could be the case. You have to put in between your ears while you're here. Right. And you have to start finding people that either are going to help you, because it's easy to see those that are not going to help you. And once you find those that will help you, latch on to them and listen. And that's what I did. Ended up being lucky. Many a times, friends that said, oh, the school didn't help me to get a job, didn't help me do this. Well, I always go back and I say, well, school had to help me with the education first. Sure, they've done a lot of bad things, a lot of wrong things. I could focus on that, or I could focus on the little bitty things that went right. And if I focus on the little things that go right, maybe they might help me in the longer run. If I divest that and focus on the things that are wrong, I could still be here, still going to school, and still wouldn't be educated. I mean, I can focus on that for a long time. And I think that's the difference in a lot of us. We can get bitter and we can get down on a lot of things that are not right. And they weren't right then, they're not right now. We got a president now that I think that's making it right, is trying to anyway. I remember when Chancellor Pai was here, and he asked me about helping to raise money through a sustentation. And he asked me about making a list of things that we could improve of people of color. And so I thought he was sincere. I gave him that list. I never saw one thing of it. I think he took it and balled it up and threw it in the trash.
Oh my gosh.
But people have their own agenda when they say something. It's like you're saying we were interviewing today and what you want to do with it. Well, you can do exactly what you say you want to do with it, or you could choose to do something else after I leave out. I can't say anything about it, but if you do what you say you're going to do, it may help somebody. It may not help the full load, but we have to come to an understanding and an agreement that this world is going to be like this. We're not going to change it. I tell people all the time, there is a substitute for oil, but they're not about to change it. I said there's a lot of things we can change, and they're not going to change it. I said, so we have to find a way to maneuver our way through this maze and make the best of it. And if we choose to make the best of it, we'll be all right, and you can get a lot of satisfaction in this world by making and associating yourself with good people. But if you hang around people that got a second agenda and just going to stab you all the time, you're going to be hurting and you'll be miserable. And the other thing about it is that you might become like them. Mother used to always say, birds of a feather flock together, but she was right. She was right about that. So
I know you're saying that we're just kind of talking about like how things were then versus how things were now, and I know some people tend to say it seemed as though we were like making progression, and then sometimes, you know, it seems like now we're falling back again, and like I just want to know what do you think? Like, do you think that like maybe as a campus, SMU is better off as it was than when you were here, or it's the same, or?
It's coming along. SMU is a big ship. I mean, this is a huge way to turn. I mean, you have some families that attend school here where they're taught prejudice in their home. And you have people that come to school like me that, you know, we didn't know anything about prejudice. And you got to look at if those folks are that prejudice to learn it, but they're paying this tuition, you're not about to change that. They're not going to turn that money away. But SMU is much better off of having a Dr. Turner, I can tell you that, to allow you to do what you're doing today. That would not have gone on in the 70s. A professor would have taught black history or culture or something, but it was not about to diversify and spread through all of the professors at SMU, whether it's math, whether it's science, whether it's English, whether it's religion, and that's happening now. So it is. It's much better off. From the time you start entering your classes, I think Dr. Turner has made a difference, and it's hard to argue against that Bible. You know, I mean, we can see the way that in the 60s and 70s through Alabama, all throughout the South, and SMU was no difference. I mean, you know, but they're trying, you know, and. Is it perfect? No. Is it going to be perfect? No. You know, they're trying to get endowed so they can, you know, do a little bit things a little different. People on the East Coast are the same way. If I would have gone to school at USC, it wouldn't have been any different. It's up to that individual to find a mentor and trying to find a way where you can make a difference in somebody's life. You know, when I came out and I thought I was going to go to the national division to do debentures and all kind of bond financing and what have you. And the president of that bank at that time, and he called me in and he said, Michael, he said, I want to talk to you. He said, you might like what I'm going to tell you, you might not. He said, but I'll tell you, I'm going to be honest with you. He said, because a lot of people like you in the bank. And he said, and I know that your first love is going to national market and travel. And he said, and I know you wanted to go to the West Coast. He said, and that part is not open, but the South is. And he said, they'll offer you a job. He says, but I don't want you to take it. And I thought, oh. And he said, I'd love for you to stay closer into Dallas. He said, now, there are no black bankers. I'm doing what you're doing. He said, but I will tell you, you won't have a door closed in your face when you offer money. He said, now they may not like you, but they ain't gonna tell you they don't like you. And he said, I'm telling you this because if you go into this travel, he says, and you'll do a job, he said, you'll probably do a better job than the counterparts in the other banks in the country. My fear is they'll have some snotty-nosed kid that hadn't done half the work, but they have an uncle or an aunt or somebody that they can say, oh, we need to take care of our own. And they'll get the deal. And after that happens to you so many times, you're going to get frustrated and you're going to quit us. And we're going to lose our investment. He says, I want to make a difference and invest in investment in you, and I think you can do that for us. And he said, but, you know, talk to your wife. He says, I'm just being sincere. He said, I'm going to tell you something else. He says, I went to school in Oklahoma. I was an engineer, and there wasn't any engineering jobs when I was coming out of school. Oh, and by the way, my parents were dance instructors out of Quincy, Illinois. They taught people how to dance. So they weren't any business people either. And he said, I'll look at you, and I know your folks are laborers, he said. So he said, in a way, we're right. He said, and I'm going to tell you something else. I'm not the smartest guy in the bank at all. He said, but I get along with everybody. He says, there's so many people that are smart in here, they could take all of my brain and it won't take up maybe a fourth of theirs. He said, what I'm trying to tell you is somebody like you that can get along with a lot of folks, and you're going to be honest with them and truthful, you'll go a long ways in Dallas. He said, but just think about it. And he said, now you could turn me down, take the job, and he said, you'll get a chance to see what I'm saying, or you can not take it and don't worry about it. And I went and talked to my wife about it, and I did exactly that. I said, I'm going to trust him. And so we stayed in touch until he died. You know, they shipped him off to Houston after the bank died, but it's worked out well. So it goes back to what we talked about earlier. When you find a mentor, you find somebody with a passion, somebody that's going to be pretty open and honest with you about what they see and trying to mold your aspirations of what you want to be. You can get there with that. But if you swallow that bitter pill and you fight, you might win some of these battles. You ain't going to win the war, though, at all. And so that's been Mike Rideau from the time I've entered SMU. And I don't know, I mean, you know, then I'll have friends that'll say, oh, Michael, why don't you just tell them that SMU really didn't help us find any jobs and whatever? And I said, well, I can't. All I can say is that they gave me what I needed, and I was in that education. And now it's up to me to try to navigate and to do something with that. And there was one guy that came to school here, and his dad asked me about helping him to make a decision to come here because he wanted to go to North Texas and play in the band. And so I talked to him, and he called me one day. He said, Mr. Rideau, he says, this guy, he's made me so mad. He says, I'm ready to tear his head off. And I said, man, what's going on? Slow down. He said, you know, he's just about called me the N-word. I said, oh, wait a minute, man. So he said, yeah, he has this Oreo cookie, and he went on and tell me about it. I said, man, let me share this story with you because you got a right to feel the way you feel. And I'm pretty sure you could tear his head off, you could pummel the guy, you can do whatever you want to do, and you're going to be satisfied at the end of the day because you did this. And he may not ever say that again. So let's say that's what happened. Now, let's fast forward you at SMU in your fourth year, and something just might come up that says that we need somebody black to go to Washington, D.C. to participate in this program, and your name comes up. I can assure you what they're going to remember about you is tearing this guy's head off your freshman year, and that's going to be more profound than your grades. Now, it's not fair, but I guarantee you that's what's going to happen to you. And so what I'm asking you to do is to let it go and walk away from it. Let him think he's right. And you can tell him he's wrong, but let him think he's right. I said, because, you know, people like that are taught something, and you're not going to change their mind. You're not going to change your mind if you beat him. I said, that's not a way to change your mind. And so I said, but just think about it for me before you do anything. So he walked away. And this is what was so profound, I can't pinch myself. 4 years later, I would come to his concerts out here, you know, during the years and whatever. 4 years later afterwards, I get this phone call. And he said, Mr. Reed says, SMU called me into the office, into the dean's office, and I'm getting to go to visit Vernon Jordan in Washington, D.C. Now, I never knew that was going to happen. I didn't think it was going to happen. I just threw it out there. And he got to go, and SMU paid his way. Yeah, so I always just say, you know, you have to pick and choose what you're looking for in life and what you want to do, and you just can't get there all the time fighting. I mean, it's a way, you know, and like I tell people now, we still talk about civil rights. We fought them, whatever, and the fight now is about parity. Civil rights is going to be there, but it's about parity. It's because when you go to the store, or Jessica goes to the store, you can't buy meat cheaper, bread cheaper, or anything else cheaper. And so it's about being fair. It's about being paid for the work that anybody else will do, whether it's a man or a woman. And so that's the fight that we have now with this education. And so I look at Don Jackson and I'll go back to him. And they've named a room after him in the business school after him. The class that they have now and the curriculum that they have and the women that are coming out of these classes and the jobs that they're getting to look at now are just, I mean, they just blow you away of what's being offered. And they're to women and they're getting paid the same as men. So that fight is what we have to be about.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So just to before I wrap things up, is there anything else you want to add that you feel I haven't touched on?
No. You know, we can always probably talk about something or whatever, but I wanted to just touch on the things that you wanted to talk about that might make a difference if you show it to someone else.
Definitely will.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was amazing. So it was very interesting to learn about you and all of your other friends, because we've actually been doing some research, and so I had heard of Ira Terrell and Oscar Rohn. So
good. Yeah. You know, Oscar is he's a traveling minister. You know, he goes all over, and an incredible human being.
I think someone actually tried to reach out to him for this project, but I don't know if he ever got in touch with him.
Yeah, he lives right there in Rockwall, but he's an incredible human being. You know, he played ball with the Cleveland Browns after he left here for a while. Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Time.